Welcome to It's a Yes, Making It in Media.
I'm Jo Wood.
And I'm Debra Sharron. Between us, we've spent many years helping people build successful media careers, from first jobs to senior leadership.
Each week, we answer real questions from our listeners, covering everything from interviews to sales conversations with clear, practical advice.
If you're ambitious, capable, and ready to take control of your career, you're in the right place.
We're going to talk about something which we're both hearing a lot about, whether it's through the recruitment process or through the sales process, and that's this spooky old word, ghosting.
So broadly, that's when to chase and when to walk away. Yeah,
absolutely.
And this seems to be a constant ongoing thing, whether you're actually trying to sell to a client or whether you're in an interview process. The whole ghosting piece is something that we're hearing about all the time, aren't we?
Absolutely. And it's a really upsetting, demotivating thing that a lot of people are having to contend with. You know, maybe you've had a brilliant meeting and everybody's really very positive and giving you lots and lots of buying signals if you're a salesperson, and you really think it's gone well and there are some very clear actions and you've done everything properly, and then the whole world just goes completely silent.
They just vanish.
Absolutely. And you start writing out your own horror story. You know, you take it very personally, and it becomes very depressing, actually.
And whether it's selling to a client or whether it's in recruitment, it's exactly the same kind of thing. From a recruitment perspective, you go for a brilliant first chat, it's a great interview. Sometimes the hiring manager will talk about the next steps and then they just disappear. And there's no closure, just silence. And the flip side of this is that occasionally from a recruitment consultancy point of view, the candidate who said they thoroughly enjoyed the first interview suddenly vanishes as well.
It doesn't matter whether it's a candidate or a hiring manager or a client. Nobody's immune. And I mean, people often talk about the dating scene as being another place where ghosting happens a lot. Maybe you and I aren't expert in that particularly, but it's this idea that how do you mentally and through your actions deal with this real phenomenon?
And to be clear, it's not just your bad luck. Recent UK research suggests over half of employers, so that's a huge number, admit that they've ghosted applicants at some point in the process. Half. Can you believe that? That is a ridiculous number when these days, the ability to just write an email, something really basic that says thanks for your application, but on this occasion you've been unsuccessful. How difficult is that?
It's really terrifying. I think similarly, there's some research that I read recently that said a quarter of UK employers say that they've been ghosted by new starters on day one. So someone's actually gone right the way through the process of accepting the job and then don't turn up.
It's not common, I have to admit, but very occasionally it has happened. It's always really difficult to understand. It's like people become scared to say they've changed their mind. Changing your mind is a very human response to anything. Everybody does it over something. Actually, I think it's much better just to be upfront and you keep everybody in the loop. I know it can be, if you feel like you've signed a contract, that can be a bit of a worry. But at the end of the day, most people understand that personal circumstances change. And just being honest is a much better way forward.
Yeah. So in a situation perhaps where you've gone for an interview and then there's the silence, or you've sent out a sales proposal and then there's the silence, what are we thinking that silence actually means?
So let's start with decoding, because not all silence means the same thing. There is a massive difference between I'm too busy to reply right now, I'm avoiding an awkward no, which in my experience, that is the most likely thing, or this is never happening.
So do you think people find it inherently difficult to say, actually, no, this isn't for me, I don't want to proceed? They'd rather fudge and leave people in the lurch than actually give a definitive no.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that?
I think that the easiest one to deal with is an employer's point of view, to be perfectly honest, because even if they don't want to personally say no, it is so easy to send a very nice, polite email that takes 2 minutes, or can be even an automated email that just provides the candidate with some closure. It's not difficult. Obviously, in the ideal scenario, you want some feedback because candidates like to learn from each experience, and it's much easier for them to take a no if they have got something to process and learn from it. But the very basic no thank you, on this occasion you've been unsuccessful, at least provides closure. And that's something that most employers can do within 24 hours of whatever interview it is, whatever stage it's at.
Yeah, and I think with a salesperson who's had a good meeting and then perhaps has gone away and done a lot of work to scope out a proposal, it's to their advantage to keep putting in very clear deadlines and explain why the timeline from that meeting onwards is very important and very meaningful, and try and create some kind of a framework of timing. Because if you just send something over and say, let me know what your thoughts are as soon as possible, you're really allowing the other party to go silent. So being able to create some kind of accountability through next steps may be a way of perhaps managing expectations.
In recruitment, we try and think of 3 different scenarios that might have occurred that we share with candidates on an ongoing basis. So it could be that the client is just genuinely not decided, that there are other candidates in the process, it's a bit slow, they're still interested. It could be that the client is genuinely avoiding this particular candidate. The role's gone, the priorities have changed, they've chosen someone else, they don't want to have that conversation. And then the final thing, the worst case scenario, is that maybe the job just didn't exist. Yeah, it was never live. They were just trawling the market. As recruitment consultants, we try not to work in spaces where that's the case. But very occasionally, again, the priorities change, or you'll find that something wasn't ever really properly signed off. And that can be difficult, but at least then, we try and manage and be very honest with candidates. But I can completely appreciate that it's very frustrating when that happens.
I think that's right. And I think that from a sales perspective, I think if you know that this is going to be a very frequent experience, then it's quite useful to put something like next step hygiene into every good meeting. In other words, every time you have a meeting or a call, you force yourself to ask some very specific questions. So you always say to the client, what are the realistic next steps from your side? Or who else needs to sign off on this? When would you ideally like to make a decision? Or shall we put a quick 15-minute meeting in for next week so we don't lose the momentum? I think that it's really incumbent on a salesperson to try and pin down those next steps in a meeting or in a conversation. Because if they won't commit to anything, no follow-up, no time at which they're going to read your proposal, no internal actions that they're going to take, they are actually giving you quite a clear signal.
And completely agree. And in recruitment, it's really similar. People often say, how many times should you follow up before you give up? Yeah. And I think that if you're in a process that you've initiated yourself, it is much harder to know when you should walk away. But there is definitely no harm in sending an email saying, I'm assuming that I'm a no. In reality, I think employers find it much easier to say, yes, I'm really sorry, we haven't got back to you. Unfortunately, that is the case, than actually to initiate the no email themselves. I have to say, the kind of clients that we work with, that we try very hard to make sure that's not happening and that we can communicate the process the whole way through.
One of the things that we talk about a lot in training is whether using a multi-channel approach to deal with the ghosting situation can be quite helpful. So you're not relentlessly chasing on email, but you are maybe picking up the phone, you're sending a text, you're sending an email, and probably the communication channel that has been most effective in eliciting that final answer is WhatsApp. That if you are able, without resorting to any stalking methods, to have the mobile number of your contact, then just sending them a quick message that says, I haven't heard from you. I'm assuming that this isn't something that you want to progress with. When would be a good time for us to pick it up in the new year or in the second half of the year? That often gets a really quick answer because you've made it super easy, as you were saying, to get that response that you've been chasing for in other ways. So I think you have to be quite creative.
It's a strange thing, isn't it, how difficult people find it to say no?
Yeah.
I wonder where that is.
Do you think it's embarrassment, or do you think it's actually nobody wants to burn any bridges?
I think in some cases it can be both, or either, or one or the other, particularly in recruitment terms when people have sounded very positive in an interview process, and especially when somebody's done quite a lot of work, produced a presentation, they find it a little bit harder to say no. And also I think that employers sometimes aren't sure, even if their instinct is to go with the other candidate, yet they're not, as you say, they don't really want to burn the bridges. They're not 100% sure whether they're making the right choice.
I think that probably, if I've learned anything over the last couple of years, it's that trying to trial close when you are actually in front of the recruiter or the client is your moment to try and test for whether this is a real interest or actually somebody may be just stringing you along. So having the confidence to say, based on our conversation today, in principle, do I sound like I'm the right fit for your company? Or does this proposal, this opportunity look like it will deliver against your KPIs? If you actually force yourself to be 1 degree more assertive when you're in front of the person that you're speaking to, you may be able to get a greater sense of whether you're going to get ghosted or not.
I completely agree. Showing closing is in your best interest to show your sales ability, but also to get some genuine insight as to whether or not the person actually is interested in you or not. And it's quite easy for them to fudge things and for you not to get clarity if they're not really interested. And most people get some instinct at the end of the interview. I mean, very occasionally we have candidates who interview for things and think it went brilliantly well and it was a total disaster. Or equally, the client thinks it went brilliantly and the candidate says, no, I'd never work for them.
Right.
I mean, that does happen. But most of the time, if it went well, people have a good idea. There's one other area where ghosting is kind of interesting, is that very occasionally a candidate will be the backup choice in an interview process. And clients will sometimes say to us, we're offering X, but we would offer Y if that doesn't happen. And we try really hard to manage that process. But again, if you are a candidate in a process that you've applied for directly, you're not going to know that. And that can be why there's a delay, which you don't really understand. But realistically, that delay shouldn't be any more than a couple of days longer than your expectation. The thing that I think is probably most important is, what's that phrase that everybody uses?
Well, I've heard in the dating game that the phrase that people often use is, if they wanted to, they would.
I get that. Yeah. Which is why, quite frankly, if you're being ghosted, more often than not, walk away.
Yeah. Read the signs. All right, so Jo, we've had some brilliant listener questions on this, from how many times is too many times to chase, through to what if a dream role or a dream client ghosts me? How do I let go?
Let's dig into those and walk through some real world scripts you can use, both for smart follow-ups and for those classy closing messages when it's time to walk away.
So the first question comes from Tom in Bristol, who says, I had 3 rounds of interviews for a digital media role. The last one was with the MD and it went brilliantly. They said they'd be in touch within a week, and that was 5 weeks ago. I've sent 2 polite follow-up emails and nothing, radio silence. Should I send another email? Should I call them? Just move on? It's driving me mad.
Tom, there are a few things that I would advocate. Number one, I think ghosting is appalling. And if the company sees fit to ghost you, little part of me thinks, walk away. It's not for you. That said, if it's a really good company and you're really in love with that role, then you need closure. And the best way to get that will be to, again, email the MD directly. I'm not actually really sure why you've waited 5 weeks. I wouldn't have waited 5 weeks. I think you need to do that generally. Or if they said 5 days, then you do it after 5 days if you haven't heard anything. And your question around, should I send another email? I would email every day, until I get an answer. And if you say, I'm sorry for driving you mad, I assume I'm a no. Can you just confirm that? Then at least you're going to get an answer.
I think there's a bigger question about professional etiquette generally. And I think when you've been on the receiving end of ghosting, that's a very good lesson to remember, which is that if you're ever in a situation where perhaps somebody is waiting on an answer from you, you need to be on it, because actually it leaves a bad taste. And in the media world, as we all know, you meet the same people going round and round. So they've done you a bit of a disservice by not coming back to you. Maybe you just do a final kind of, I am assuming that this isn't going to be moving ahead. But I think probably through those 3 interviews, it would have been good to be trying to close and get some definite next step. So it's always useful to say at each stage, when will I be hearing from you, or when can I expect to hear from you? And what does your decision-making process look like? You may well have done a bit of that, Tom. It doesn't necessarily preclude ghosting, but it may be that this is one to just move on from and find the right opportunity.
Completely agree.
Good.
Deborah, I think this is one for you. This is from James in London. I pitched to a client 6 weeks ago. They were really engaged, asked great questions, requested a follow-up proposal, which I sent within 24 hours, and then complete silence. So this is ghosting from a pitch. I've called, emailed, tried LinkedIn. Should I give up? Should I take it personally?
Well, I feel your pain, and I think that it's really frustrating when you probably spent a lot of time on that proposal and you did it really quickly, and they were giving you signals that they were interested in. I think there are a few things that probably you should do before you even write the proposal. When you're in that conversation with the client, I think you should try and agree when you will be scheduling a follow-up conversation about the proposal that you're going to send out in 24 hours. And if the client says, just send it over and I'll come back to you once I've had a look at it, I think in your head you should probably think that there are a 2 or a 3 out of 10.
That's interesting.
Well, I've just decided that actually all you're asking for before you write the proposal is a commitment to have another conversation. And if the client won't even give you that commitment, how genuinely interested are they? If they say that they're happy to book in a time with you in a week's time, then I would put the time into the proposal and make sure that you have that locked in with a calendar invitation. So I think sometimes we are so keen to write the proposal, we don't ask anything from the client before going off and doing all of that work.
I think that's really insightful. Yeah, I've got to be honest, Deborah, I don't think I would have thought about that.
Well, I think it comes from bitter experience, to be honest. I think you can end up spending so much time doing this stuff. Yeah.
So a new question. I think this one is from Mel in Bristol. I've noticed I close way better over video calls than in person. That's interesting. In person, I feel pressure to fill silences and end up talking too much. Is this weird? And how do I get better at in-person closes? What should you do, Deborah? Can you talk too much in a sales pitch? There's the thing.
Yes, you can talk yourself out of anything. Maybe the good thing about video calls is that they're much more controlled in terms of time. You tend to book in a video call, you know what time it's going to begin and people are on time and you know when it's going to end and you don't expect people to hang around. So you've got to achieve everything within that 20-minute little window. Maybe there's a bit more waffling that happens when we're face to face and therefore it just doesn't feel like the right moment. Do you think that could have something to do with it?
Maybe. I think actually, if you're somebody who finds closing challenging, it maybe doesn't matter whether you're on a video call or you're in person, it's going to be a challenge. It's about finding the right moment in any of those conversations, isn't it, really, to say, what do you think?
I have a funny little theory about this, actually, which is, the textbook would say, when is the right moment to close? And the answer would be as soon as you receive any kind of buying signal. And it's always amused me that if you are having a meeting with a client and you notice that the client wants to jot down something that you've just said, that's a buying signal.
I was just going to say, what do you think a buying signal actually is? Yeah, because be able to notice the buying signal is part of the problem. Yeah,
exactly that. But if I'm on a video call with you, Jo, and I say something and you go and write it down, well, what's that told me? It's told me that I've just said something that you're hoping you will remember at the end of this call. That's a buying signal. So if I was feeling brave, I would say, Jo, I can see that was something that interested you. Is there more that we should talk about on that particular topic? So it's picking up on the things that are usually non-verbal, but are an indicator that somebody is beginning to think that what you're talking about has got some value. I mean, a more pure or I suppose recognizable buying signal is any kind of question. So the minute that you're asked a question, you know that the other person is imagining or thinking about progressing to the next step. So that's a very useful buying signal.
So how would you respond to that kind of thing? Let's assume that I say, okay, so you mentioned how this product could do something. Tell me a bit more about that. Yeah.
So
what would I say?
I'll give you more information and I'll say, so Jo, based on what I've just told you, does this seem like something that could work well for you?
So you would literally latch onto a close straight away.
So the little phrase I have
about... That's how you got to where you got to.
I don't know about that, but I do know that closing is not natural and it doesn't feel easy. So you have to force yourself to be 1 degree cheekier than you would naturally be. So you might just want to say, in principle, how does this sound? Or if this was your decision, what would you want to do about it?
So in a normal conversation with a client, in that first pitch where you're trying to make an impression and get some kind of commitment, how many times would you utilize some kind of close?
Definitely once. And that's more than most people do.
I get that.
I think, do you know what I think? That a lot of salespeople, I don't know if it's the same in recruitment, will say to a client when they're halfway through a call or a conversation, shall I send you an email and give you a call back on this? Does that happen in recruitment?
It does. And that is a nightmare.
Oh,
that is a complete and utter waste of time.
So you and I both know that that's a waste of time, but somebody maybe in the earlier stages of their career thinks that they're being helpful. When I ask salespeople in training, okay, so you exited the conversation to send the email and then you're trying to call the client back to see whether they've read the email. Did they? And most people will say, first of all, I could never get hold of the client again. And if I did, they've never read my email. So was it just that it was an exit strategy that ended the call, but there was no follow-up at all? I mean, I think if you call somebody back and say, did you read my email? And they go, yes, it was fascinating and I'd like to move things on, then of course we're wrong. But I'm not sure that most people have that experience. I think they go off to send some information that never gets looked at and that there is then the lost momentum of a next step.
I would concur.
Yeah. Is there a difference, though, Jo, when rather than the consultant or the salesperson asking if they should go away and send that email, if the client says, could you send me an email with some information on it? Is that slightly different? Would that go into the bucket of buying signals that we were talking about earlier?
I think that's very difficult to evaluate because if the client asks for it, your assumption is that they're interested in it, but that just could be the client's way of saying, go away.
And that's where I would say, okay, you would say to the client, certainly I'll send you over that email. Shall we lock a time in now to have the next conversation?
Oh, okay.
So you're still getting the next step, the commitment they're going to read the email.
Today's Yes List recommendation is The Challenger Sale by Matthew Dixon. And this book genuinely revolutionized how I approach selling and training business development teams. The research is fascinating. The authors studied thousands of sales reps and found in complex B2B sales, one type dramatically outperformed all the others, the challenger. Challengers teach clients something new about their own business, tailor their message to each stakeholder, and aren't afraid to challenge the client's thinking. This was game-changing for me because the best salespeople create constructive tension. They bring insights clients haven't considered. It's not about being aggressive. It's about being assertively helpful. Top Takeout. Come to every client meeting with a tailored insight about the client's business or market, not just your solutions. Teach them something they don't know about their customers, competitors, or industry trends. That's what transforms you from vendor to trusted advisor. The link is in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to It's a Yes, Making It in Media.
Do follow the show and share it with someone who's serious about getting results in their media career.
If you found today's episode useful, we're running a live and interactive Zoom training workshop very soon. Just click on the link in the show notes for all the details. We'd love to see you there.